guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving y'all 15 book recommendations that you can read during Middle Grade March. And in case you're not familiar, Middle Grade March is a month-long readathon hosted by Krista, Katie, and Amanda here on YouTube. I will link the official Middle Grade March YouTube channel down below so you can get all the info, because there is a group read, there's live discussions happening, and there are a few little prompts to help you sort of choose books to read throughout the month. This will be my first year participating in Middle Grade March, mostly because I've never really been a big middle grade reader, but over the last 6 months or so, I've gotten really into the genre, and that is why I have so many recommendations to share with y'all today. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, the first book I want to talk about is All of a Kind Family by Sydney Taylor. This is a historical fiction book about a Jewish family living in New York City during the early 1900s. It's very similar to Little House on the Prairie or Anne of Green Gables, things like that, where it's mostly a story just about daily life. You read a lot about family meals, holidays, chores, and things like that. But the way it's written is just so engrossing and charming, and you grow really attached to the characters. There's tons of interesting cultural tidbits from their Jewish life in here. There's also a bit of a mystery that I think older readers especially will enjoy, and lots of wholesome sibling moments, because as you can see from the cover, the family is made up of 5 daughters. And I love to read about sibling stories, especially sisters, because I'm really close to my sister, so some of y'all might enjoy that as well. And this book does fit 3 of the prompts because it was written in the 1900s, it involves travel, and it is part of a series. I personally haven't read the rest of the books in the series, but I can definitely recommend this one. Next up, we have It's Boba Time for Pearl Lee by Nicole Chen, and as you can see, I do have some little tabs in this book. That's because I just finished reading it a couple days ago and I haven't had time to write about it in my reading journal yet, and I want to transfer some specific quotes, so I am leaving the markers in until I get that done. So this book is about a 7th grader named Pearl Lee who loves to crochet, especially making amigurumi dolls, and she also loves visiting Boba Time, which is her town's local boba tea shop, and she's very close to the owner of that shop as well. But early on in the story, she finds out that Boba Time is struggling financially and may have to close, so she decides she wants to do something to help Boba Time stay on its feet, and her idea is to sell her amigurumi dolls. The problem with that is she's 12, so obviously she can't open a business by herself, but her family doesn't really support her crochet hobby and they don't want to help her open this business. So the whole story is essentially her navigating that, helping her family to understand her passion for crochet, and everyone kind of banding together to help Boba Time. Along the way, Pearl learns so much about not only being true to yourself, but how to share your passion with the world, as well as understand other people and how they're different from you. This was such a great book. It has a lot of depth to it, and along with that, there's a lot of business and marketing talk, which I think would be very inspirational to a lot of younger people, but also older people, because I'm an entrepreneur myself. I've been running my own small business for almost 9 years now, and I thought this book was really motivational, so yeah. My third recommendation is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim by Robert O'Brien. This is, I think, the only science fiction book I have to recommend to y'all today. I do not read a ton of science fiction, and I don't think science fiction is like a huge thing in the middle grade world. I'm still getting into the middle grade world, so, don't quote me on that. But this book is about a mouse named Mrs. Frisby who has 4 children, and long story short, she needs to have her house moved. And she can't move it herself because she's obviously a mouse and she lives in a cinder block, so she cannot move the cinder block on her own. So she needs to recruit some help, and she goes to the local rat population, but they are not normal rats. They are actually super intelligent rats who know how to read and have formed their own society. And if you're like me and you don't read a ton of science fiction, you may be thinking that this sounds super weird, and it is a little bit weird and out there, but I promise you this story is so interesting. I don't know how to explain it, but it just is fun to read about these little creatures who act like humans. I've always really liked anthropomorphic animals, so maybe that's why I'm so into this book, but it's a very adventurous book and it really draws you into the story, so yeah, I wanted to recommend it. The next book I want to recommend is not one that I own physically, unfortunately, but it is Masterpiece by Elise Broach, and I will put the cover up on one of these sides, whichever looks better when I'm editing. So Masterpiece follows this little boy named James who lives in New York City, and for his birthday he gets a pen and ink drawing set from his dad because his dad is an artist and he wants James to share that love and passion for art that he has. The problem is James has absolutely no talent for drawing, but he doesn't want to disappoint his dad, so he essentially tells his dad that he's working on this secret project and he'll show it to him in a few days. So one night James stays up really late trying to do this ink and pen drawing, and he falls asleep at his desk. And a little beetle who lives under the kitchen sink, his name is Marvin, he wanders onto the desk with James and decides to try his hand at drawing. So he actually creates this really great picture, and when James wakes up, he realizes what the beetle has done, and they kind of go into this little ruse, I guess you could call it, together to convince James's parents that he's the one putting together these drawings. And the two of them end up embroiled in this very interesting art heist mystery. It's a super fun story. Again, I love anthropomorphic animals or insects in this case, and I think this book is really fun because you don't read a lot of middle grade books about art history. In this book you talk about Dürer and Rembrandt and stuff like that, so I thought it'd be really fun if you're interested in those topics to recommend this book to you. Next up we have The Mysterious Howling by Mary Rose Wood. This is by far one of my all-time favorite middle grade books. It's another historical fiction, an almost fantasy type novel. It follows our main character Penelope Lumley, who recently graduated from school and now she's going to be working as a governess for this family in a big estate in England. And when she arrives, she meets her 3 students, who are these children pictured here on the front. And as it turns out, they are not normal children. They have actually been raised by wolves in the woods around Ashton Place, which is the house that she's staying in. So her job is to civilize and educate the children, and she goes about that as best she can, but she quickly discovers that there's something up with the kids, not just the fact that they were raised by wolves and that they howl and chew on everything, but there's a deep mystery to their heritage and why they were found around this particular house. So Penelope goes to investigate that, and that is what the main series is about, because this is a 6-book series, I want to say, and the mystery continues through the whole thing. So the mystery is enjoyable, but I think my favorite aspect of this book is the found family, because Penelope's an orphan, the children are orphans, and they just kind of form their own little family unit. It is so cute, and this book has so many funny, precious moments, and just very witty humor. The narrator that you get is really clever. So overall, I highly recommend this book. I will say the series, in my opinion, kind of peters off around the 4th book. The last 2 are not my favorite. It's worth reading just to finish the series, but the first 4 books are the strong ones. The next book I want to talk about is The Luminous Life of Lucy Landry by Anna Rose Johnson. I listened to this as an audiobook, so I will put the cover up on the screen somewhere. This book starts off with our main character Lucy, who is an orphan, and she's getting sent to live with a new family on the shores of Lake Michigan or Lake Superior. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's definitely somewhere in Michigan. And the family is a family of lightkeepers. The dad works as a lightkeeper and the kids kind of help. And they all live in the house at the base of the lighthouse right on the edge of the lake, which sounds really fun and adventurous, except for the fact that Lucy is scared of water and boats and all that stuff because her dad actually died in a boating accident. So you have a lot going on in this book. It's very Anne of Green Gables-esque, where you have this orphan who's kind of overcoming the things she's dealt with in the past and trying to fit in with this new family, but she also has this dreamlike character to her personality where she's not always paying as much attention as she should, and she gets into some situations because of that. But it's a really fun and sweet story. I really liked seeing how all the characters grew together. So not just Lucy learning who she's meant to be in this family, but the family members learning things from Lucy as well. And also Lucy and her family are Ojibwe, so you get a lot of Ojibwe culture in this book, and also some of the language as well, which is another reason I liked the audiobook, because the narrator did a great job. And as for the prompts, this book does have an author with 3 names, and also it involves travel because you have Lucy traveling from where she is at the beginning of the book to where she ends up with her family. So it does fulfill a couple of prompts. Book number 7 is Wish by Barbara O'Connor. This is another very recent read for me, and I loved it so much. This is one of my favorite books I've read this year by far, and right away, as you can tell by the cover, it has dandelions on it, so it's going to fulfill the flowers on the cover prompt from this year's readathon. This is another orphan story. I did not realize how many orphan books I had to talk about, but I guess that's a trope in middle grade literature. This girl's name is Charlie, and I guess I shouldn't really call her an orphan because she has living parents, but they're not able to care for her right now. So she gets sent to live with an aunt and uncle that she doesn't know who live in the mountains of North Carolina, and she is convinced she's gonna hate it. Before she even gets there, she thinks they're all gonna be hillbillies and she's just gonna be miserable while she's there. But shortly after she arrives, she meets a neighbor boy named Howard, and she also gets a dog, as you can see on the cover right there. And they help her learn that even though she's not exactly where she thinks she should be in life, she can still enjoy herself and be grateful for what she has. This was such a sweet and touching book, and there is so much character development in here, not just with Charlie, the main girl, but also with the family that adopts her and some other characters as well. So I thought this was a great story. It was really touching for me personally because I do have some personal connections to different things in this book, but yeah, very sweet story, and if you like dogs, you'll definitely like this because the dog is a huge part of the book. The next book I have here it's probably more young adult than middle grade, but I feel like the line between middle grade and young adult is very easily blurred. So I wanted to include this. This is Shady Hollow by Juno Black, and it is a cozy mystery novel. As far as cozies go, this is a very standard formulaic cozy. Our main character is Vera, the fox that you see on the cover right here. And she is not a detective or police officer, but she ends up investigating this murder and working with the police to find out who did it because it happens in a small town and, you know, everybody's all up in arms and wants to know what happened. So the actual plot of this is not that special, but what I like about it is that all the characters are anthropomorphic animals who wear clothes and drink coffee and read books and stuff. And it's just so cute to read about. I think this is such a cozy and fun read. It's definitely a comfort read for me, and I think it could be a comfort read for a lot of other people as well. Plus it does have flowers on the cover, so it will fulfill that prompt. The next book I want to talk about is Where the Mountain Meets the Moon by Grace Lynn, and I don't have this one in physical copy either, unfortunately, so I'll put it up on the screen. This is another historical fantasy type book that follows Min Lee, who's a young girl living with her family in this really poor farming village. And they struggle a lot in their daily life just to get by. They're like subsistence farmers, but there's nothing to subside on, unfortunately. So to kind of pass the time and help them keep their spirits up, Min Lee's dad is always telling her stories from Chinese folklore. And the stories are actually put into the story as like mini stories, which is really fun. I don't think I've read a book like that before where they kind of segue, go into a whole other story and then tie it back to the main story. It was really fun. But all these stories inspire Min Lee to go in search of the old man in the moon to ask him how to change her family's fortune. So she sets out on this quest, and as she goes, she meets a lot of different people and characters and has tons of adventures. She hears more stories. And it's just a really fun, whimsical novel. And woven into all the adventure is a lot of Chinese folklore and great life lessons. There's this part at the end of the book with one of the beings, I don't want to spoil it, one of the creatures that Min Lee meets that was just so touching and heartwarming. I really liked it, and I highly recommend this book. I also listened to this on audiobook, and the narrator, I think it was Janet Song, she did a fantastic job. Also, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon will definitely fulfill the travel prompt because Min Lee ends up very far from home on her quest to find the old man of the moon. The 10th book I want to recommend is Breaking Stalin's Nose by Eugene Yelchin, and I wanted to include this because it's very different from anything else on the list. It is an extremely short book, as you see. I think it's like 155 pages or something. 145 actually, so even shorter than I thought. And what makes it even shorter than that is that it's kind of like a graphic novel. There are tons of pages in here that are just pictures or, you know, pages with text, but really large pictures as well. So this is a super short story that takes place over the course of only 2 days. It is set during the Stalinist regime in the USSR, and our main character is Sasha. Sasha's dad gets arrested very early on in the story, and Sasha thinks it's a mistake. He's been taught to believe that, of course, Stalin doesn't make mistakes. Everything Stalin does is right, so he is really struggling to understand how Stalin could have arrested his dad for no reason. And the story, again, only takes place over 2 days, but throughout the 2 days, you follow Sasha as he comes to understand that you have to think for yourself. You can't just believe what you're told, and finding the truth is really important. It's much more important than just conforming to society. I think this is a great book. I was really impressed with how the author was able to take the Stalinist regime, which is just really a tough subject, and put it in a middle grade book that's not only understandable but also true to what happened at that time. And I will say this is a bit of a darker, tougher middle grade read. The Stalinist regime was brutal, there's no getting around it, and some of that brutality is in here, so definitely be aware of that if you're not interested in reading those types of things. But if you are interested in political history, I would recommend that you read Breaking Stalin's Nose. Recommendation number 11 is The Borrowers by Mary Norton, and as you can see on the cover right here, this is the book that inspired the movie The Secret World of Arrietty. I have not actually seen that movie, so I don't know how similar the book and movie are, but I just wanted to point that out. So The Borrowers is the story of the Clock family. You can see them on the cover. You have Mother and Father Clock and also Arrietty, who is the daughter of the family. And they are borrowers, which are basically miniature human beings that live under the floorboards in normal people homes, and they borrow everything they need to survive, which really just means stealing and taking things that they need. Which sounds very fun and adventurous, except Arrietty is not allowed to borrow. She's not allowed to go out and take things. She has to stay under the floorboards all the time while her dad does the borrowing. And Arrietty doesn't like this. She's very lonely and bored. So one day she sneaks out to borrow something, but she ends up running into a human boy. And they kind of strike up a friendship along with having some very interesting adventures along the way. And also correcting Arrietty's preconceived notions about humans because she's been taught some very interesting and not totally true facts about the big people, as they call them. This book was also written in the 1900s, so it fulfills that prompt, and it's part of a series. I have read the first two books. I didn't like the second one as much as the first, but I have heard that the third and fourth ones are the best, so. Next up, I have The Mystery of the Clockwork Sparrow by Catherine Woodfine. This is a super fun book. You follow the main character, Sophie, who is also an orphan, and she has recently taken a job at Sinclair's department store just to make money and try to stay on her feet. That's all she wants to do. But while she's there, she quickly befriends a couple other employees and they sort of form this found family, which I love in case you can't tell. But then something happens at Sinclair's. There's a robbery and a couple of other episodes that occur, and they actually suspect Sophie as one of the people who took part in this. Unfortunately, the adults in this book don't believe her, and they just are kind of buffoonish, honestly. So it's up to Sophie and her friends and some other kids in the book to set the record straight and prove what happened. So they are investigating this incident and the mystery of what happened to the Clockwork Sparrow, which was stolen during the robbery. This is a fantastic book. I already mentioned the found family aspect, which is very sweet and wholesome, but you also have, I think, one of the most likable casts of characters in this book. I just was in love with them. They are so fun to read about together. And the other characters, even the villains and stuff that you're not supposed to like, they are portrayed really well. This is my first book by Catherine Woodfine, but she's a great author, and I definitely want to check out more from her. And this is also the first book in a series, so it fulfills that prompt. Number 13 is The Winter King by Christine Cohen. This is another book that I think kind of straddles the line between middle grade and young adult. This is definitely upper middle grade. It has some deeper topics to it because we're following our main character, Cora. She lives in this village, which is sort of like a Nordic fairy tale fantasy-esque village that is ruled by the Winter King, whom everyone worships as a god, basically, even though life under him is really bad. The villagers are starving, the weather is always terrible, and when they pray to him and offer him tribute and stuff, he doesn't seem to help them at all. But everyone in the village still blindly follows him, and he has a very powerful group of priests under him that kind of control the village. But then one day, Cora starts to question all this stuff about the Winter King, and throughout the book, she learns more and more that makes her really wonder what's going on. So this is another book where it's about finding the truth, staying true to yourself, not just conforming to society, which I think are really great lessons for kids to learn, but adults as well. I will say though, despite the deeper topics in here and the really great life lessons, this is a very cozy read in my opinion. I know it's super winter themed. I mean, it's literally called The Winter King and it's covered in snow, but I think it's a great cozy read for any time of the year. Second to last, we have On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness by Andrew Peterson. This is the first book in the Wingfeather saga, and it follows the Igby family, of whom we have Janner. He's the oldest son of the family, and they are humans who live in this world that's being controlled by these dragonish snake human hybrid creature things who are called fangs, and the fangs are very not nice to humans. They mistreat them, they occasionally kidnap children and enslave them, and nobody likes the fangs, basically. The Igbys have pretty much lived under the radar up to this point, but then the secret comes out that makes the Fangs really hate the Igabys. So the Igabys have to go on the run to avoid being captured by the Fangs, and that's what the story is mainly about. It's a very adventurous and fun fantasy book. I would almost say that this reminds me of Junior Lord of the Rings because of all the fantasy elements and the adventure and just the nature of the book, the way it's written. I think the language kind of reminds me of Tolkien. As I mentioned, this is the first book in the Wingfeather saga, so it is a series. I've read the first 3 books. Second one was not my favorite, but I did really like the third one, and this also involves travel because they go on a very big adventure. Okay, the last book I want to talk about is The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. I don't own this one, unfortunately, either, but this is a really fun kind of spy-esque novel. Our main character is Rainy, and he answers an ad in the paper for gifted, intelligent children, and he goes to take this test, which is very unusual. It's not like a math or reading test. But after he passes, he finds out that he's basically been inducted into this spy school for children. And he and a few other kids have been tasked with infiltrating this school on an island nearby where they think weird things are going on, basically. There's no one really allowed in or out of that school, and the guy that runs it is very questionable. So they are told to sneak into the school, infiltrate, pretend to be students, and figure out what's going on. I don't read a lot of spy books, but if they are like this, then I see why everyone likes them, because this is a very clever and fun book with lots of puzzles and riddles and just adventure. It was just really fun to read. It also has great character development and life lessons. I think that's really important in middle grade books, which is why I'm bringing it up for all these that I've mentioned so far. But I enjoyed seeing the characters grow and learning about them as the story progressed. And it is part of a series as well. I haven't read the other books, but the author also has 3 names, which I think is kind of hard to find in middle grade, at least in my opinion. I only had 2 books on this list, right, with 3 names. I don't know, maybe it's just me and I don't know that many middle grade authors, but hopefully the 3 names of Trenton Lee Stewart helps somebody out there. Alright, so that is all I had for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed these recommendations. Let me know down below if you think you'll read any of them. Even if you won't, let me know what you're going to be reading during middle grade March, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!